morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it's the CEO series. We're starting a little late today because Ralph is in California, which is an hour behind our normal time. And so welcome, everyone. As I said, if it's Friday, it's the CEO series where we bring together the most interesting people to talk through their careers and how they achieve what they are at the top of the pyramid, so to speak. So our guest today is a longtime friend, Ralph Simon, who's the chief executive of Mobilium Global. To give you some background, he has a diverse career of over 30 years in media and entertainment, mobile phone technology, content, exponential medicine, personalized health, and it goes on and on. I mean, if I had the time, I would read all of it. He's a pioneer in mobile technology and content industry, having co-founded and developed a leading independent music and music publishing companies and record labels. And we talked about that when we were in Pakistan a while back. He's recognized globally as a skilled moderator and interviewer at such conferences as the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. With that, my friend, how are you?
Very, very good. It's fantastic to see you, Ron, and great to be with your wide global audience. Just so great. I know the great work that you do and the way that you spread the gospel of making sure that people do great things in business, are creative in business, and create opportunities for careers and jobs to thrive.
Cool. I'm looking here now. We just got a shout out from Joey. Remember Joey? Joey was with us when we were in Pakistan a while back. So he's an upcoming guest. So hey, Joey, glad to see you. Well, you have such an interesting career. And one of the things I found interesting about you, even when we first met, we had dinner that night, was that you consistently made zigzags and U-turns and like your crystal ball was working. Walk us through that.
Well, I think a lot came from the fact that I was born in Africa, and in Africa, you really have to use how can I say, creative thinking to really advance if you want to make progress. Partly because it's not America, it's not Europe, it's not the UK, but there's an incredible spirit to be able to get things done, as is the case, for example, in the UAE, which really, if you look back 50 years ago, what Dubai was, a pearl fishing, tiny little harbor, so to speak. But what I'd also always been very fascinated about was how you take creative thinking and the creative industries and blend the two of them together in such a way that you can do something that develops something completely new and something that has appeal for a much, much wider audience. And how that originally started was when I was at college, I formed a band. The band became very successful in my hometown in Africa. And that then led me to understand what audiences liked and what people liked to hear and what people like to dance to. And that then in turn led me to think of starting a music company, a record company, which I did. And that record company then over the course of the next 7 or 8 years or so grew to become the most significant record company in Southern and Central Africa.
Yes.
It was a time of very, very bad politics in South Africa, and I didn't feel that I could really have a continued future there under the political system, and in a sense became a sort of political exile, but made the decision to move to London. This was some years ago, and the idea of moving to London was that, first of all, if one could find talent and develop it and be successful with it, just to give you an idea, in Southern Africa, if you had a gold record, which is the standard of great success of product, you would sell 25,000 units. If you did that in the UK, you needed to sell 500,000 units. If you did that in America, you needed to sell 1 million units. So if you balance up, which would be the objective to go for? So anyway, moved to the UK, and over the course of the next couple of years, a lot of struggling because of arriving there as a new young African business person. One of the first successes we had was that I managed to sign in the very early stages a group called the Village People, who are very famous, of course, over 50 years. with a song called YMCA that became it's sung
Wow.
at weddings and celebrations all over the world. And then that then led on to develop a record company, and the record company went on over the next 15, 20 years or so to create Britney Spears, the Backstreet Boys, Justin Timberlake, a number of other really prominent people. This took me through to the early 90s. I had decided that it was time to move on from the music business because I'd always felt that there was a synthesis between entertainment and technology. Why did I feel this? Well, I had started seeing the first stirrings of the internet coming out
Okay.
of Silicon Valley. And to me, it just seemed to be such a clear road and focus to be able to be in a position where if you could find technology, maybe you could find interesting ways of marrying those two things.
Wow.
What is entertainment? Creative entertainment is films, television. Um, this is way before streaming, of course. And
Yeah.
of course, the streaming, one has to thank an incredible young Swedish data nut and data scientist, Daniel Ek, who decided to start a company called Spotify, which at the time when people
Yeah.
heard what he was trying to do and when he was desperately trying to raise money, no one would give him the time of day. But in any event, I then left London and moved to San Francisco and moved and got a house in just near Silicon Valley, just in San Francisco, but just about 16 miles from Silicon Valley, and then started to find and meet and get to talk to a whole new creative community in Silicon Valley. And what struck me about this, Ron, was that seeing these people, and bear in mind, this is when the internet was just getting
Yeah.
going. What I couldn't get over was this was a can do society. It's kind of like what you find in Dubai. If people say, can you do that in Dubai? And of
Yeah.
course, you can do stuff in business. It's a can do society. And what does a can do society mean in an emerging new area where the internet, still in its infancy, um, could could really help lubricate the wheels of your train that is moving into this space. So
Mm-hmm.
if you went to try and see a venture capitalist, there's a road in Silicon Valley called Sand Hill Road. Sand Hill Road had a number of VCs, some of the very big VCs that are so
Money
prominent.
people.
But also there was talk that if you gave an elevator pitch in Silicon Valley, that would be the best way for you to get money. And I thought to myself, well, what is an elevator pitch? Well, in the Sand Hill Road, there was a large 6 or 7 story building. And the plan was that you'd go into the building, you'd stand outside the elevator because a lot of executives who were these venture capitalists would be waiting to go up to their offices in the morning. And if you could buttonhole them and be in the elevator with them and give them the pitch of the
Yeah.
money that you were looking for, maybe, just maybe, they would listen to what you say and they would give
Yeah.
you the dosh. Well, that's basically how the phrase elevator pitch came
Yeah.
into being. But as I say, I started to meet the creative community in Silicon Valley, and at the same time, it also started a new record company in San Francisco, and found that in San Francisco there were an incredible array of people in technology, in the creative industries,
Yeah.
songwriters. Some really amazing talent has come out of San Francisco. Santana, and of course, over many years, very well known. Although many people that were found in San Francisco would go to Los Angeles to actually do their business contracts and so forth. But anyway, it was during the time that I was there and developing this whole new technology area that I got an approach from um, a gentleman who's unfortunately no longer alive, but an incredible creative thinker by the name of Charles Koppelman in New York, who
My
was
good friend.
he was your good friend, and you knew this guy well. He was really one of a kind, but an incredible creative entrepreneur, meaning
Yeah.
he could think of an interesting way of creating something new with great talent and then spread the word and make it internationally significant.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me if I would come to California, come to Hollywood, and join Capitol Records in Hollywood, which was the biggest subsidiary in the then EMI group. EMI was, in its time, the world's greatest recording company. It's now owned by Universal Music, which today is the world's greatest and biggest recording company. And he asked me if I could come to Capitol Records and the famous jazz record label Blue Note.
Yeah.
And I said to him, and I said to the key guy that was running Capitol, and this was in Hollywood, in a circular building, which is the first circular office building in the United States.
Yeah.
I said I would only come to Capitol because I'm an independent entrepreneur. I've never worked in a job for somebody before. But if you would please take a look at mobile, because mobile and mobile phones and mobile technology is where this whole internet thing is going. They said,
Wow.
how did you know that? I said, I know that because from what I've seen of the early stages of the internet and the way that people communicate, and particularly what people under 26 are doing when they are first getting onto the internet, I am convinced that this is the way forward. And they said, how do you know that you can be convinced? And you know, Ron, I have to tell you, as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you and many of your viewers and listeners know this, if you get a sense in your body, in your system, that something can work, you've got to take the chance. Otherwise, a terrible thing happens. You know what? Nothing. So you can't have nothing happening. You've got to have something happening. Anyway, I then relocated from San Francisco to Los Angeles, quite an adjustment, and then started going in every day to Hollywood, to the capital to work. And had an incredible time then, started to introduce mobile technology and mobile phones into the company. And it was at a time when, for example, some of the artists that we were developing there, people would know Radiohead, very important global money-making machine now, but great creative artists. People like the Beastie Boys, who were really right at the very fulcrum of the hip-hop era, which actually started 50 years ago this week, 50 years ago tomorrow.
Hip-hop.
50 years ago tomorrow, hip-hop. I then started to want to do something in the mobile space, but in those days in the record business, they were just struggling to come to terms with the internet, let alone mobile, and I felt that it was time to move on. I had not really worked for a big company before, always been an independent entrepreneur, as I'd said. And I thought, what I would like to try and do is find a team where I could take this mobile idea and maybe put it into practice. And people would say to me, are you nuts? You're getting very well paid working for this incredible company. You've just done the last album by Frank Sinatra. It's been a huge hit. You've done all of these successful projects. Why on earth are you doing this? And I said, you know, I don't know what it is, but man, my entrepreneurial flame is saying to me, go for this thing called mobile.
Wow.
So I managed to find a team in Silicon Valley, I beg your pardon, in Santa Monica. And the team was made up of two incredible engineers, two South Africans and one British guy, just was coincidental, one guy from Australia. And our knowledge in the music industry allowed us to understand what it took to license recordings. License song compositions. And we thought, is there a way that we could send out what effectively is an email now that the internet has started, wrapped into which would be a music file? Because if we know how to license the music, maybe we can go to all of the owners of the recordings and the songs and say to them, this could be a new way in which you could get to the young mobile users on these new large mobile phones. Remember, it wasn't like today's iPhone or today's
the basic model,
basic model. And just to try and get the permission from the publishers, the copyright owners, the music company owners, was very difficult because we had to explain, look, there's a new future here. The whole thing, Pete, this is going to change. What you will see in the next few years is the mobile phone is going to become the remote control of your life, your business, your wife, your girlfriend, your music, your everything.
Everything.
And at that time, I would also say, and this is for all of those entrepreneurs that are watching, we were trying to raise money. We had difficulty raising money, and we had exactly 12 days of finance left in our little company where we were trying to promote these ringtones. 12 days, think about it. 3,000 hours. Is that what it is? No, 12, 24, yeah, 3,000 approximately. That's all we had left. What are we going to do? Well, we'd been working on trying to see if we could get one of the big telephone operators in America, and in this case, it was AT&T, obviously a great global company, to try and see whether they might be interested in taking the ringtone idea, and using ringtones on AT&T. Well, with 12 days to go, the clock was ticking, but we were not taking a licking, and basically we signed the deal with AT&T. And that really was the changing force that changed the business and created a whole new industry.
So is that where you got the moniker of the father of the ringtone?
But to tell the truth, I didn't invent the ringtone. That was created in Japan by a company called Docomo, and also in Korea, SK Telecom, very important Korean technology company and telecom. But what we did was we took international content and turned it into a way that it could be used all over the world. So, for example, wow, if Bob Marley and his music was very popular, and it was popular all over Africa or all over the Middle East or the GCC or the UAE, we could take that and make that useful and popular for users. And we then started seeing if we could do this with many other telcos around the world, and that brought me into contact with the GSM Association. GSM Association is the world's major only trade body for the world's telephone system and infrastructure and handset manufacturer and so forth. So that basically then led to this new industry, and we were very much finding ourselves in the position of being the kind of the category leaders by explaining to people that the world was changing. There were going to be whole lots of things that you get on your phone. Remember, this is when text messaging was just getting going. You know, people think now, well, let's make a call on WhatsApp. It's easy to see somebody. You can do so many different things on your phone. The first days of using just a text message, that was difficult. There is a company in San Diego in California called Qualcomm, very well-known international engineering company, that had also pioneered some of the technology that would allow ringtones. And we could just see wherever we went internationally. We set up an office in Helsinki because Nokia were really the number one handset during that period. And gradually this bullet, this rocket, this express train of this whole new area started to take shape.
That is absolutely amazing. You know, because what I thought of, besides the flashbacks, when you mentioned the village people, you know, which was out when I was coming out of university and talking about our dear friend, Charles Copperman. To give some background to the story for the audience, Ralph and I met in Islamabad a year or so ago, and we had dinner together. This whole group of us, Joey, in Pakistan. Yeah. And we had dinner, and we just were sharing stories. And you know, he mentioned the music business, and I just asked him because Charles Copperman was a very, very dear friend of mine, and that's how this whole conversation started. And I found it so amazing that you could be at the forefront of so many changing technologies, but you were never afraid to say, you know what, the gentleman, you said someone told you that, why are you going to do that? You have a good job here, you're making good money, but you wanted to try something else. And I say that's kind of an instinct of entrepreneurs. Would you say that's kind of an instinct that you say, well, things are cool, but you know what? I want to try something else.
I think it works down to a very simple, basic premise, and that is if you're interested in ideas and particularly interested in trying to determine what is coming next, that stimulates your thinking because as an entrepreneur, you're always looking around to see where
Yeah,
is the audience, where is the sales success that you might be able to
yeah,
develop, and what would it take to do that? And I remember that there were some very well-known entrepreneurs. One of my mentors was an incredible guy that I had met when I was an exchange student. I'd gone from Africa to the United States and was had gone to New York, and for a while worked in the offices of General Electric in New York. But I'd met this gentleman who asked me to come and stay with his family because I was an exchange student, and he was somebody who lived the idea of finding an idea that would stimulate some kind of an entrepreneurial activity.
mm,
And he always made me aware of what is it that people really like to do or to have, and can you be right at the starting point of something that is coming up that is going to prove to be interesting. And I always think of somebody like Elon Musk, who was also from Africa originally, as people know, or most people might know. He was raised in Pretoria, the capital of South Africa.
yeah,
And it's interesting because I spoke to his mother a few months ago, and I asked her what was Elon like as a kid at school, because here's somebody who's an unbelievable entrepreneur, one of the
yeah.
greatest in the world, and now the richest man in the world, believe it or not. And she said, at school the teachers always used to complain that he would be looking out of the window daydreaming, and we didn't know what he was daydreaming about. Maybe he was daydreaming about getting a rocket to Mars. But in any event, um, the idea of trying to think of what might really attract people was still is the driver. It still drives things in a really strong and effective way. So
Mm,
um, the trick, of course, and the challenge for anybody that's in business is how do you do that? How
yeah,
do you find it? How do you find people? Can you do it on your own? Generally, you can't. Where do you find the money to do it? Quite difficult, although now trying to find capital, and particularly during a period where there's in Silicon Valley, I was just in Silicon Valley this week, in San Francisco and in Palo Alto.
mm,
But I you just always have to think about how do you make a better future? How can you
mm,
make a better future for a product, for a business, and for trying to create a new service that people wouldn't be used to getting, but that would be something that would be amazing? And for me,
yeah.
a very good modern example right now is there's a woman here in Los Angeles by the name of Greta Gerwig. I don't know if any of your viewers and listeners would be aware of Greta and her career, but Greta has just become the first female movie director
Yes.
to have the first movie to gross over $1 billion.
1 billion. Yeah.
And what is interesting is she managed to get the license from a toy company that was started 70 years ago in California called Mattel Toys. And Mattel, some 5 years ago, they changed the CEO to an incredible entrepreneur, a guy by the name of Enon Kreitz, Kreiz, Enon Kreitz. Enon was somebody that in earlier years in his career had developed the Mighty Power Rangers, a well known
Yeah.
cartoon
Hmm.
character. And then he started a company called Maker Studios, which he sold to Disney. And he was invited to become the chief executive of Mattel. And of
Wow.
course, the story of Barbie, the Barbie movie, which gave Greta Gerwig her $1 billion global box office take. But Enon had the foresight as an entrepreneur to really think of Mattel not as a company manufacturing toys, although that is what they do. And of
Yeah.
course, Barbie is the biggest selling doll ever in history. But what he decided was we must become an IP company. What do
Yeah.
you mean, Mattel becoming an IP company?
Yeah.
Well, we have intellectual property. We've got Hot Wheels. That's a very interesting toy. Now, if
Yes.
we made a movie of that, if we made a movie of Barbie, if we made a movie, we've got 15 other toy products. How do we change that to become a movie or a TV series or something
Mm.
like that? And of course, if you look at the major television networks, Rupert Murdoch and everything with News Corporation,
Yeah.
how do you develop something that can have a wider reach? And
Yeah.
that's always the goal. I mean, if you look, for example, at what's going on right now in Saudi Arabia, paying hundreds of $1 millions for soccer players, what
Yeah.
they've paid Ronaldo, what they've paid
Yeah.
Sadio Mane, it's all about getting an audience. But these are all things I believe that drive entrepreneurial thinking. And you've always got to think not that the grass is greener on the other side, but how you can go and capture that grass and
Yeah.
turn it into some product.
Yeah.
Because the grass might be greener on the other side, but how do you take it and make it into something that is commercially attractive?
So there was a discussion early online, and an hour or so ago, I responded to it. And one person was saying how brilliant the marketing was, and the marketing, the marketing, the marketing. And a
Yeah.
friend of mine, Curtis, who's the chief marketing officer for a company, and he mentioned, "Oh, that's cool." He said, "But the visionary was the person who gave them the green light to go that direction, because." How many times have you come up with a great idea and you have someone above you that said, "No, I don't think that's going to work," and they still want to stay on the tried and true method?
You know,
And
I
that
think
was the
that
discussion.
I think it's true. I'll give you another interesting example I just heard when I was in San Francisco. There's a very interesting young man by the name of Palmer, Palmer, Lucky. Interesting name. You think, well, he's a lucky guy. He is actually a lucky guy. And why is Palmer Lucky such an important individual? Well, he is the guy who actually created a company that was bought by Mark Zuckerberg uh, for $2 billion. Um, and he then decided, after he'd sold his company to Facebook, or Meta as it's now called, what he was really interested in doing after selling this technology, because he 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 decided that the future lay in drones and drone architecture, where you can do incredible things with drones.
Mm.
He's now developed a whole new technology for developing swarms of drones that can be used in climate control protections, and the whole world of drones has completely exploded. But um, he he's one of these people that was always restless, always felt that he had to move on to something new and something stimulating and something that could change the world.
Yeah, you know what? You mentioned, the discussion you had with Elon Musk's mother,
Yeah,
and about the school and school system, and sitting there and you being bored. In a lot of cases, he would have been branded as below par, or something along those lines. So, if we had to say reinvent the school system and education, or to think more of, what's going to be the next thing, what advice would you give to educators or teachers, and you have a student like that, who maybe appear to be disruptive, and I've already branded them as a troublemaker, but maybe they're onto something?
well, while I gave you the story of Palmer Luckey, and I omitted to mention what he invented a company called Oculus.
Ah,
So I'm sure people are familiar with the Oculus, the head-mounted display units for virtual reality, augmented reality, and extended reality. But in terms of education, um, it's I believe it's absolutely critical to have art or arts or creative thinking when one is learning, because it's that which translates into new product design, product thinking.
yeah.
There is a whole education revolution going on around the world. And in fact, it's just interesting. One of the people that I went to see when I was in Silicon Valley is this extraordinary woman by the name of Esther Wojcicki. Esther is nearly 80 years old. She is renowned as being one of the world's greatest educators. And it's evident in Esther's three daughters. She had three daughters. Her oldest daughter, Susan, was one of the earliest employees of Google. In fact, Google started in her garage, in Susan's garage. Google were looking to rent some property. This is when Sergey Brin and Larry Page had just started Google. And she said, hey, I've got my garages available. You guys can rent it. They came in and basically developed the early formulation of the Google technologies. Susan joined very early on. And then Susan brought them a company called YouTube, which she bought. And YouTube, she then ran for some 15 years or so. She's just stepped down from that. And
She did. Yeah, I
still
saw
at
that.
Google, but she's still involved in working in a division in Google called Waymo, which is all about electric vehicles. Obviously, she's things for the future. And then Susan has a sister, another one of Esther's kids, by the name of Anne, who married Sergey Brin, and then started a genealogy site called 23andMe. And then there's the third daughter called Janet, who is one of the world's top epidemiologists, who is based in San Francisco. And you say to yourself, what is it with these three kids of this mother educator that have all done so well? Why is it like this? And I spent time with Esther and I asked her, how is it that you've managed to create and develop these kids that have all proven to be such leaders in thinking, in creativity, in business, in their own personal development? She said, the whole thing from when these kids were growing up was I had to treat them to be as independent as possible from as young an age as possible. Wow. That doesn't mean I'm neglecting them as kids when they're growing up. It simply means, like, for example, if the kids had to get school books for the new school term, she would say, here's $20, there's the store, you go and get what you need or what you want. Now, of course, in today's helicopter parenting, which is quite common in the UAE or elsewhere. But this really struck me when speaking to Esther, because Esther was a teacher for 40 years at Palo Alto High School, the most important high school in Silicon Valley. And she's taught pretty much everybody that's gone on to make a career in Silicon Valley. And her whole thing all the time was that creativity is a subject that should be even more important or as important as science and mathematics. Creativity. And if you look at who is creative in business, the most creative business people, we spoke about Palmer Luckey, that's creativity. And basically helping to drive creativity, not squelching creativity.
You mentioned 23andMe. It's amazing how small a world it is. The gentleman I mentioned to you that I had the discussion with online concerning the marketing behind Barbie is the chief marketing officer for 23andMe, Curtis Midkiff. Extraordinary marketer. And that was the same discussion that we had earlier. And that's who he works for now. He's been with a lot of brands, but I think he found his home there in doing what they're doing. And he's doing amazing work, as it relates to that. I thought the same thing about education. I teach at a couple of schools, as an adjunct. And I just say, this is the real deal. I gave a speech at the London Business School, and I said, you know what, all of this fluff that you're thinking about, it's not like that. You gotta be able to figure things out. Talk about problems you faced and how you solved it. That's where and this is what people hire for. Right. They hire someone that are problem solvers, not someone that can come in and maintain and keep it in the lane and all those kinds of things. That's the Ron Thomas version of education.
And that's an important Ron Thomas viewpoint, because problem solving is obviously one of the greatest challenges of the modern era. Just looking at this terrible fire that happened in Lahaina in Hawaii. Just the last couple of days, so far nearly 60 people died, and there are going to be many more, unfortunately, they will find. But just think about the entire city has been completely destroyed. I mean, this is like what happened in Canada last summer when there was a major fire that destroyed a Canadian town. And of course, we're now living in this era where the climate crisis is really right with us. And how do you solve a problem like that? That's a huge planetary problem
Yeah.
that we've got to try and solve. And um, but isn't this really the challenge of an entrepreneur? Whether you're trying to create a new way to make shoelaces for a new way to tie up shoes, or whether you're trying to create some new fragrance if you're in the perfume business, or
Hmm.
for example, a new way to make non-meat food, which obviously is still an ongoing movement because of people saying that vegetarianism is more beneficial. But what is it that drives entrepreneurial thinking?
Yeah.
Business schools teach the subject, and if you look at some of the greatest businessmen, Sir Richard Branson, for example, yesterday he
Amazing.
had three people that flew in his plane just on the outer edge of
I saw that.
gravity, including an 80-year-old man suffering from Parkinson's, who 18 years ago paid $250,000 for a
Hmm.
ticket to ride on Richard's Virgin Galactic spacecraft, and a mother and daughter that won two tickets because they won a lottery ticket, and the prize of which would get two tickets to go on the
Yeah.
plane.
Yeah.
You think, what made Richard decide to do this, to build an aircraft that could take people to the edge of space and then say that he was going to sell tickets to go into space? Well, I know that he'd raised $40 million by selling how many tickets would he have had to sell at 250,000
Yeah.
for $40 million? That was
Yeah.
his original money he raised, but it took 18 years to get to the point. And now, of course, those tickets are costing something like $400,000,
Hmm.
and he
Yeah.
will sell them even at that incredibly high amount because people, how else would you be able to get into space in your
Yeah.
lifetime?
Yeah.
So
It's
Richard is the quintessential entrepreneur. I mean, here's a guy who he started Virgin Cola, he started Virgin Music, he started all of these
Virgin.
companies.
It goes on and on. And if you've ever read his life story in school, he was considered dyslexic or a slow
He's,
learner.
he's dyslexic.
Yeah, he's dyslexic. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
considered that. So it goes back to education. Now, my friend Jim Moy, who's an attorney out of D.C. for the American Bankers Association, he says we do not need educators who go more than skin deep and taps into the unlimited power potential of our children.
Yeah.
Yeah, going more than that. So just to give a shout out for some other folks there, and I appreciate all the guests that listen. Wafa from Lebanon, Khalid from Morocco, Mita, Dorota, who's my good friend and business partner based now out of Krakow in Poland, and my always trusted companion, John Self, who's going to be a guest on the show, on next week. So Ralph, I want to go back to you as we begin the process of closing out. What shaped Ralph? I mean, what shaped Ralph to a lot of people? I go back to what you said. People say, "Oh, you got a great job. Why are you looking to do something else? You got the job. You're making this. You're doing this, but you want to do something else." I mean,
Right.
where did all that come from?
I think one of the central influences is that my mom was an incredible high school teacher, a beloved high school teacher. She was one of those high school teachers that you hear about that kids just really love. And I was very fortunate to have had her as my mom. My dad was an accountant, so he taught me the rudiments of at least some kind of business computation, although it wasn't
Yeah.
as sophisticated as that. He just said, "Look, there are three things
Still,
you
with a calculator. Yeah.
there weren't even calculators then, but he said three things you got to learn. One, your reputation is absolutely quintessential. Always make
Mhm.
sure you have a good reputation. Two, make sure that you always fulfill your promises. Only do what you say you're going to do. Don't not do what you say you're going to do. And third of all, most important of all, be reliable. Because if you can have those three elements, and one reinforces the other, that'll help you. But my mom was always somebody that taught me to really look at the other side of the argument, and also to look at how you could make people's lives better. It wasn't just a question of being materialistic and making money, although obviously that is important. But what can you do to make people's lives better and change their future so that they've got optimism? Because without optimism, we're living in a dark place.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for that. I always like to, I do a session when I do leadership development, I ask people to tell stories like that. And one of the things I found, it goes back to a teacher in high school. It goes back to a mom and a father of whoever it is, but it's never a CEO or someone, if that was in your orbit, but it's always that grounding kind of approach before you get out there and really get into the stream of things. There's always that something there that starts it all out.
Right.
So at one of our goals on the CEO series, as we begin to close out, is to create a platform for engaging leaders like yourselves to talk about, your career journey. And you've dropped so many nuggets today for us. And we hope you enjoyed being a guest on the show. Any closing thoughts that you'd like to give the audience?
Yes, the new area that we're looking very seriously in is Web3. Web3 is a very important next step in the whole development of the internet. And I'm working with an incredible company involved with this company in Korea, a company called GuruFin and DigiGoose, not digital goods, but DigiGoose, that have really pioneered a whole interesting new way of using the metaverse to help brands and branding. So those of you that are interested in just getting a sense of this, DigiGoose, DigiGooz or Z, DigiGoose. And we're involved in some really incredible new developments where you can take the metaverse, particularly for brands, because in marketing today and brand development, this is a really critical area. And then also very involved in looking at developing some really cool, interesting stuff in and from India. India is just such a vast repository of incredible people, incredible thinking. And trying to stimulate some new startups that hopefully will give us our money back and allow us to maybe one day think of being in Elon Musk's coattails.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Ralph? Thank you so much, man. We'll be in touch, and maybe we'll catch up either in London or next time you're in Dubai. So thank you so much for being a guest, and we'll talk later. Thank you.
Well, I'll be in Dubai for GTEx coming in for that. So looking very much forward to seeing and spending time with you, Ram. Thank you so much. It's always such a thrill and a treat and a pleasure to be with you. You are somebody that I have great, great respect and regard for, and you're one of the real good guys.
Thank you. That kind of branding says it all. Thank you so much.
All the best.
Take it easy.
Okay,
bye-bye.